My name is David Carter. I'm 79 years old. For 42 years, I believed my office was where my life happened. If you had met me back then, you probably would have called me successful. I certainly did. I joined my company when I was 23 years old, fresh out of college. One cheap suit, one worn leather briefcase, more ambition than experience. I wasn't looking for a job, I was looking for a future. My first office was barely bigger than a storage room. A metal desk, a squeaky chair, a tiny window overlooking the employee parking lot. I remember standing there on my very first morning, watching hundreds of people walking into the building. I told myself, one day, people will know my name here. I had no idea. I'd spend the next 42 years inside those walls. The promotions came slowly. Nothing happened overnight. I stayed late when everyone else went home. I volunteered for difficult projects. I worked weekends. I missed birthdays, skipped vacations, answered phone calls during family dinners. Every promotion felt like proof that the sacrifices were worth it. Supervisor, operations manager, senior director, finally, regional operations director. I had the corner office I'd dreamed about as a young man, floor-to-ceiling windows, a large conference table, awards covering one wall, family photographs on another. Every morning before I even sat down, someone was already waiting outside my office. Questions, problems, decisions. People needed me, and if I'm being honest, I loved that feeling. The office was alive. Phones ringing, printers humming, someone laughing in the hallway, young employees rushing into meetings with coffee in their hands. Every Friday, someone brought donuts. Every month, there was another birthday celebration. Every December, the office transformed into a Christmas party. Music, laughter, terrible dancing. The younger employees always convinced me to join the group photo. I usually pretended I didn't want to, but secretly, those became some of my favorite memories. Over the years, I watched interns become managers, managers become executives. Some even became my closest friends. Watching people grow was one of the greatest privileges of my career. Looking back, it wasn't the spreadsheets I remember. It wasn't the quarterly reports. It was the people, the conversations, the noise, the feeling that I belonged somewhere. That building wasn't just where I worked. It became part of who I was. Maybe too much. Because without realizing it, I slowly began measuring my worth by one question. How many people need me today? I didn't know it then. But one day, that answer was about to become no one. I still remember my last morning at the office. It was a Tuesday, October 3rd, 6 a.m. The alarm rang. For a moment, everything felt completely normal. I shaved, put on my favorite navy blue suit, the one I always wore for important meetings. As I adjusted my tie, my wife stood in the bedroom doorway. She smiled. Big day today. I forced a smile. Yeah, I guess it is. She walked over and straightened my collar. She had done that thousands of times over the years. But somehow, that morning felt different. Neither of us said what we were really thinking. She knew I was scared. I knew she knew. Yet neither of us mentioned it. The drive to work was strangely quiet. No music, no radio, just the sound of the engine. Every red light seemed to last longer. Every familiar street carried a memory. I realized I had driven this exact route for over 40 years. Thousands of mornings, thousands of sunsets on the way home. I wondered, would I ever drive it again? When I pulled into the company parking lot, I didn't get out. I simply sat there, watching people arrive. Some hurried toward the entrance with coffee cups. Some laughed with coworkers. One young employee nearly spilled his coffee while trying to answer his phone. I smiled. I used to be that young man, thinking life was just beginning. I had no idea. Mine was about to begin again. When I walked through the front doors, the receptionist looked up. "Morning, David." "Morning, Lisa." She had greeted me almost every weekday for 18 years. Neither of us realized it would be the last time. My office looked exactly the same. The leather chair, the framed awards, the family photographs, the bookshelf filled with leadership books I hadn't opened in years. Everything was in its place, except me. For the first time, I felt like a visitor in my own office. Throughout the morning, people kept knocking on my door. Not because they needed approval, not because they needed a decision. They simply wanted to say goodbye. One by one, they came in. Some brought cards, some brought gifts, some just wanted to shake my hand. A young project manager stood quietly in the doorway. He looked nervous. Finally, he said, "You probably don't remember this, but 12 years ago, I almost quit." I searched my memory. He continued, "You asked me to stay. You told me one bad year doesn't define a career." He smiled. That conversation changed my life. I honestly didn't remember saying those words, but he never forgot them. That hit me harder than any award hanging on my wall. Around 3 o'clock, someone asked me to come to the conference room. The lights were off. As soon as I opened the door, everyone shouted, "Surprise!" The room exploded with applause. There were balloons, photographs, a huge cake. Someone had even found pictures from my very first year at the company. There I was, 23 years old, too much hair, an oversized suit, a smile full of confidence, the room filled with laughter. So did I. Then the speeches began. People told stories I'd completely forgotten. The time I bought pizza for the entire night shift during a snowstorm. The Christmas party where I accidentally burned the turkey. The summer picnic where I lost a volleyball game to a group of interns and never heard the end of it. For a few minutes, I forgot I was retiring. I simply enjoyed being surrounded by people who had become family. Then the CEO stood up. The room became quiet. He thanked me for 42 years, for my loyalty, for my leadership, for helping build the company. Then he handed me a small wooden box. Inside was a beautiful watch. On the back, just 6 words. "Thank you for 42 unforgettable years." I turned the watch over in my hands, and for the first time that day, I couldn't hold back my tears. I stood to give my speech. I'd written 2 full pages the night before. I thought I was prepared, but when I looked around the room, I couldn't read a single word. I folded the paper, put it back into my pocket, and simply said, "Success is never built by one person. Thank you for letting me spend my life with all of you." That was all. The room stood. Applause echoed through the walls. Some people were crying. I was too. 30 minutes later, the conference room was empty. The balloons were still hanging from the ceiling. Half the cake was untouched. Someone had forgotten a paper plate on the table. Life was already moving on, just as it always does. I carried one cardboard box back to my office, a few family photos, some books, a coffee mug, the watch, nothing more. 42 years, fit into one cardboard box. I looked around the room one last time, turned off the desk lamp, closed the door, and whispered words no one else could hear. Goodbye. I thought I was saying goodbye to my office. I didn't realize I was saying goodbye to the man I had been for 42 years. The first Monday of retirement was the quietest morning I had experienced in 42 years. At exactly 5:45, my eyes opened. No alarm. My body didn't know I was retired. It simply followed a routine it had practiced for decades. I got out of bed, showered, shaved, made coffee. Everything felt normal until I reached for my car keys. They were sitting in the same wooden bowl by the front door. I picked them up, walked halfway across the hallway, then stopped. There was nowhere to go. I stood there for what felt like forever. Finally, I put the keys back. That simple movement hurt more than I expected. My wife was already in the kitchen. She looked at me over her coffee mug. "You're dressed early." I looked down. I was still wearing a pressed blue shirt, a belt, polished shoes, exactly as if I were heading into another Monday meeting. We both laughed, but only for a second, because we both understood. I didn't know how to be home. At 7:30, I instinctively reached for my phone. Every weekday by that time, I usually had 10 or 15 emails, questions, problems, meeting reminders. Instead, the screen was empty. No missed calls, no urgent messages, no one asking, "David, do you have a minute?" The silence was deafening. For years I had complained that my phone never stopped ringing. Now, I found myself wishing it would ring just once. Around 9 o'clock, I wandered into my home office, not because I had work to do, because I didn't know what else to do. On one shelf sat 42 years of plaques, awards, and framed certificates. For a long time I simply looked at them. Then I asked myself a question I had never dared to ask before. Without this job, who am I? It was frightening, not because I didn't know the answer, because I realized I had never taken the time to find one. The days that followed all felt the same. Monday looked like Wednesday. Wednesday looked like Saturday. Time no longer had shape. One afternoon I found myself ironing a shirt, even though I wasn't going anywhere. I laughed at myself. Then, unexpectedly, I cried. Not because I missed the office, because I missed feeling useful. A week later, I drove past the company. I told myself I was only taking the scenic route. The truth was, I wanted to see if anyone missed me. I parked across the street. Employees hurried through the entrance, some carrying laptops, some balancing coffee cups. A few stood outside talking before work. I recognized several faces. Life inside that building looked exactly the same. The company was doing just fine. Meetings were happening. Phones were ringing. Someone else was sitting in my office. For a moment, that realization stung. Then another thought quietly appeared. Maybe that's how it's supposed to be. No one is meant to stay forever. We all become part of someone else's story. Then it's their turn. When I got home, my wife was sitting on the porch with a book. She looked up and smiled. "Would you like to sit with me?" Normally, I would have said, "Give me 10 minutes." Then answered emails, returned calls, finished one more report. But there were no emails, no calls, no reports. So I sat down. Neither of us spoke for a while. The breeze moved gently through the trees. Somewhere nearby, children were laughing. A dog barked in the distance. Simple sounds, sounds that had always been there. I had just been too busy to hear them. After a while, she closed her book and looked at me. "David, can I tell you something?" "Of course." She smiled gently. "For the first time in 42 years, I don't have to share you with your job." I looked at her. She wasn't angry. She wasn't blaming me. She was simply telling the truth. And somehow, those words hurt more than anything I'd heard during my retirement party. Because I realized something. While I had spent 42 years building a career, she had spent 42 years waiting for moments like this. I reached for her hand. She squeezed mine. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Sometimes, the most important conversations happen in complete silence. That evening, I went to bed with one thought I couldn't shake. Maybe retirement wasn't asking me to find another job. Maybe it was asking me to rediscover the life that had been patiently waiting for me all along. The morning after our conversation on the porch, my wife asked a question she had probably wanted to ask for years. "Would you like to have breakfast without looking at your watch?" I laughed. Then I looked down at my wrist. Out of habit, I was wearing the same watch I had worn to work every day, the watch the company had given me at my retirement party. I slowly took it off, placed it on the kitchen table, and for the first time in over 4 decades, I ate breakfast without wondering what time it was. It felt strangely uncomfortable and strangely wonderful. A few days later, I noticed something in our living room that I couldn't believe I had never really seen. An easel, a half-finished painting, soft blue skies, wildflowers, an old wooden bridge crossing a quiet stream. I stood there studying every brushstroke. When my wife walked into the room, she smiled. You're looking at my latest painting. I turned toward her. You painted this? She laughed. David, I've been painting for almost 20 years. 20 years. I honestly thought she was joking. 20 years? She nodded. Every Thursday afternoon. I searched my memory. Every Thursday. I had either been traveling or staying late at the office. While I was discussing budgets, she was creating beautiful landscapes. I had lived in the same house, with the same woman, yet somehow I had missed an entire part of her life. The following Tuesday, she asked, "Would you like to come with me?" "Where?" "My gardening club." I blinked. "You have a gardening club?" She smiled. "I've had one for 15 years. Again, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. When we arrived, several women greeted her with hugs. One admired her latest painting. Another thanked her for organizing a charity flower sale. They all knew her, not as someone's wife, as Helen, a talented artist, a loyal friend, a kind neighbor. I stood quietly beside her, listening, watching, smiling, and thinking the same thing over and over. Who is this remarkable woman? On the drive home, I finally asked the question that had been sitting in my heart all morning. Why didn't you ever tell me about all of this? She looked out the window for a moment. Then she answered softly, I did. I looked at her, confused. She smiled gently. You were usually answering an email, or thinking about tomorrow's meeting, or saying, we'll talk later. You never meant to ignore me. You were just somewhere else. Her words weren't cruel. They were honest, and honesty has a way of reaching places excuses never can. That evening, I opened an old kitchen drawer looking for batteries. Instead, I found a stack of handwritten birthday cards. Every single one was from my wife. I sat down and started reading them. Some were 20 years old. Some were faded with time. One of them began with the words, "Thank you for working so hard for our family." Then, a few lines later, she had written, "I only wish we had a little more time together." I don't remember reading that sentence when she gave me the card. Maybe I had. Maybe I was simply too distracted to let it sink in. But reading it now, it felt like she had written it yesterday. I closed the card, held it in my hands, and whispered, "I'm sorry." Not because she had asked me to, because I finally understood what she had quietly carried all those years. The next morning, I surprised her. I made breakfast, not very well. The eggs were overcooked. The toast was slightly burned. The coffee was too strong. She laughed through the entire meal. "You know," she said, "this might be the worst breakfast you've ever made." I laughed too. Probably. Then she reached across the table, took my hand, and said something I'll never forget. "It's also my favorite." Not because of the food, because for the first time in years, we had nowhere else to be. That afternoon, we took a walk through our neighborhood. No destination, no schedule, no rush. As we walked, she slipped her hand into mine. It felt so natural, yet I realized I couldn't remember the last time we'd walked like this. 45 years of marriage. And somehow, the simplest moments had become the rarest. That evening, I looked at our wedding photograph. Two young people, full of dreams, standing hand in hand. I smiled. Then I quietly said to myself, I spent 42 years building a successful career. Now it's time to build the marriage she always deserved. And for the first time since retiring, I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. I was actually looking forward to it. A few weeks after I retired, my daughter called. "Dad, would you like to have lunch tomorrow?" I looked at my calendar. For the first time in my adult life, there was nothing written on it. I smiled. "I'd love to." She laughed softly. "You know, that's the first time you've ever answered without checking your schedule." I laughed too, but deep inside, I knew she was right. The next afternoon we met at a small cafe near the river. It wasn't expensive, no white tablecloths, No business people talking into headsets, just quiet music, the smell of fresh coffee, and a father who finally had nowhere else to be. For the first few minutes, we talked about ordinary things, the weather, her students, the city. Then I looked at her and said, "Emily, tell me something about yourself that I don't know." She smiled. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." She stirred her coffee for a moment before speaking. "When I was 32, I almost quit teaching." I stared at her. "You did?" She nodded. "I felt like I wasn't making a difference. I cried almost every night for weeks." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I remembered that year. I had been traveling constantly, Chicago, Denver, Seattle. I remembered the airports, the hotels, the meetings. I didn't remember noticing my daughter was struggling. She looked at me and smiled. "Don't blame yourself, Dad." "I never told you." I nodded slowly. "Maybe. But I also never made it easy for you to tell me." Neither of us spoke for a while. Sometimes the truth doesn't need many words. A few days later, my son called. "Dad, can you help me build a bookshelf?" I smiled. "Of course." When I arrived, he already had the wood laid out across the garage floor. We measured, cut, sanded, laughed when I accidentally drilled a hole in the wrong place. "Retirement has slowed you down," he joked. "Maybe," I laughed. "Or maybe I finally stopped rushing." As we worked, he suddenly became quiet. Then he asked, "Dad, do you remember teaching me how to use a hammer?" I smiled. "Of course." He shook his head. "That's not what I remember." I looked at him. "I remember looking at your face after I drove my very first nail. You looked so proud of me." He smiled. "I spent the next 30 years trying to see that look again." The hammer slipped from my hand. I didn't know what to say. I had spent years trying to give my children a better future. I never realized what they wanted most was simply to know I was proud of them. That evening, I drove home in complete silence, not because I was sad, because I was thinking. I had always believed being a good father meant providing a safe home, good schools, family vacations, college tuition. Those things mattered. They always will. But sitting in my car, I finally understood something. Children don't only remember what you gave them, they remember how you made them feel. The following Sunday, our whole family gathered for dinner. Nothing special, no birthdays, no holidays, just dinner. The grandchildren were running through the backyard. Emily was helping her mother in the kitchen. Michael was setting the table. I stood quietly in the doorway,
watching everyone laugh together. Then my youngest grandson ran over. He grabbed my hand. "Grandpa, come play with us." Without thinking, I stood up. Years ago, I probably would have said, "Give Grandpa 5 minutes." 5 minutes would have become 30. 30 would have become tomorrow. Tomorrow would have become next week. This time, I didn't wait. I ran into the backyard. We played soccer until the sun began to set. I wasn't very good. They didn't care, neither did I. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I walked into the living room. The house was quiet again, but it felt different now. It no longer felt empty. It felt full. Full of laughter, full of memories, full of moments I almost missed. I looked at one of the family photographs on the shelf. For years, I believed my greatest achievement was the career I had built. That night, I realized my greatest achievement had been sitting around my dinner table all along. I had simply been too busy to notice. About a year after I retired, I stood in my backyard just before sunrise. No phone, no meetings, no deadlines, only birds welcoming a new day. For most of my life, I only saw sunrises on my way to work. Now, I watched them because I finally had time. That morning, I opened an old leather briefcase I had carried for nearly 20 years. Inside were meeting notes, business cards, travel schedules, a lifetime of work. I smiled. Those memories would always be part of me, but they no longer defined me. I closed the briefcase and placed it back on the shelf, not because I wanted to forget, because I had finally learned to move forward. Later that day, my wife handed me a cup of coffee. She smiled. "What are you thinking about?" I looked at our family photographs. Then I answered, "I spent 42 years building a career. Now I'm finally living the life I worked so hard to create." She reached for my hand. Neither of us needed to say another word. A few weeks later, my grandson invited me to his school's Grandparents' Day. Without checking a calendar, I said, "I'll be there." At school, he proudly introduced me. "This is my grandpa David. Not a director, not a manager, just my grandpa." Somehow, those words meant more than every promotion I had ever received. People still ask if I miss my career. Sometimes I do. I miss the people, the laughter, the purpose. Those years mattered. But if someone offered me my old office today, I would smile and politely say, "No, thank you." Because I finally understand. Success was never the destination. It was only the road. Home was waiting for me all along. If you're still working, work hard. Be proud of what you do. But don't wait until retirement to enjoy the people you love. Don't wait to have breakfast with your wife. Don't wait to call your children. Don't wait to play with your grandchildren. Time moves faster than we think.
Today, I'm 79 years old. I've held important titles, led amazing people, built a successful career. But when people ask what I'm most proud of, I don't think about my office. I think about my family. The mornings with my wife, the conversations with my children, the laughter of my grandchildren. Those moments became the greatest achievements of my life. If I could say one thing to my younger self, it would be this: work hard, dream big, but never postpone the people you love. Because one day, your office will belong to someone else, your title will belong to someone else, but your family needs you while you're still here. People think retirement is the end of life. For me, it was the beginning. Life didn't begin because I retired. Life began because I finally stopped postponing it. Thank you for listening to my story. Take care of yourself, and take care of the people waiting for you at home.